Rolliste TV, bonjour, Mathieu avec un seul T à l'antenne, Marc au même étage, bonjour Marc.
Bonjour.
And we've got down below, Jonathan, how are you?
Bonjour, yes, I'm all right, thank you.
Okay, and you told us it was the French you had was bonjour.
Yeah, bonjour,
Okay.
le vin rouge, excusez-moi.
Bonjour à tout le monde, bonjour Sanigol, bonjour Nim Replica et tous ceux qui commencent à arriver. Alors, Jonathan Gunn est ici, on va lui poser plein de questions. Donc, ne vous inquiétez pas, ça sera en I will ask the question in English. Mark as well. On va poser les questions en anglais et on va bien entendu, comme vous le savez maintenant, on va vous traduire les réponses et n'hésitez pas, bien entendu, après, dans le chat à nous demander si vous avez raté certaines choses. Donc, vous connaissez peut-être La Nuit du loup-garou. Vous connaissez peut-être, alors en français, ah ouais, il est là. J'ai avoir besoin. Beowulf chez Alconost. On a également donc Oz. On a également Alice au Pays des Merveilles. Vous connaissez peut-être, il va arriver en français, Dracula. Vous connaissez également peut-être, alors il vient juste, si vous avez regardé Rollist TV hier, The Tides of Inmouth. All of them are your creations. And Jonathan, and the first question that we are going to ask was, we are going to talk about, your actual projects, and then we'll go back in time when the sun was glowing warm. Et nous allons donc revenir dans le temps passé, c'est-à-dire qu'on va commencer avec donc l'actualité que vous avez. Et Marc, on commence avec ces deux premiers livres. Donc, ce sont les adaptations du jeu de plateau Horreur à Arkham. Marc, je te laisse poser la première question. Hi, Fabien.
Okay, so you seem to have a strong connection with the Lovecraftian universe. How did you come to immerse yourself so fully in this new series of game books?
Alors la question, comment Jonathan a écrit ça? Il a écrit aussi donc Shakespeare contre Cthulhu. Il y a une petite patte Cthulhu. Comment est-ce qu'on s'immerge ainsi?
So, how I came to be immersed in the world of Lovecraft, I don't remember the first time I read a Lovecraft story. But when I discovered them, I obviously started to read various versions, various adaptations, graphic novels, all sorts of things. And the more I discovered about the unsettling world and the truly despairing nature of cosmic horror, this might sound weird, but the more appealing it was.
Alors il disait au début, il ne connaissait pas trop, puis il a vu de plus en plus d'adaptations, puis il a commencé évidemment à s'immerger dans ce monde, dans le monde et les lectures quelque peu dérangeantes et cet univers dérangeant qu'est Lovecraft. So, what was your work method concerning these particular books, because you are in Lovecraftian world, but you also are in a board game world. So how do you mix that? Comment est-ce qu'on arrive à mêler le littéraire avec évidemment le jeu de plateau?
So the way I came to start working on those was because Aconite Books did some Marvel game books, and I started out by doing a technical pass edit on 2 of those, and then they asked me to write the next one. But before I could write any more, the license was returned to Marvel, but then they said, we want to do game books based on the Arkham Horror card game.
Alors la première chose, c'est que donc c'est la société Aconite qui avait déjà fait des livres dont vous êtes le héros, Marvel, et Jonathan était passé dessus pour pouvoir justement l'aspect technique. Alors ils ont dit, bah tiens, est-ce que tu pourrais nous en faire sur Lovecraft, parce qu'on a perdu la licence Marvel, donc on va aller dessus. So how did you...
So the actual game books themselves, it's the creations of Lovecraft, but within the Arkham Horror card game. So it's trying to take the cosmic horror and getting rid of some of the more unpleasant elements of Lovecraft's work, which is what they've done with the card game. So you have much more of a diverse range of characters. And rather than being totally despairing, you know, when you find out what the cosmic horror is, you then get your chance to grab your shotgun and fight back.
Yes, that's a very challenging aspect of the games based on the Lovecraftian world.
Yeah.
And donc, en fait, il disait qu'il fallait prendre l'aspect donc Lovecraftien, mais débarrasser de ce qui veut être gênant. Et puis à la fin, quand même, on va répondre. Alors, Marc, toi, tu as terminé. You finished that one.
Absolument.
And there's something. Do you have a question about the ending? No spoiler.
Yes, the ending.
Yeah,
Okay.
about the end. Yes, you talked about the Lovecraftian cast with his.
Yes, because this you choose a story with a very massive Lovecraftian cast in it.
Yes.
So how could you manage this kind of story with so many, without spoiling it?
So it's a lot of planning, basically. I was given a brief that they wanted the first game book to be set in Arkham itself, and also that it should involve strange cults, which is obviously core to the game and Lovecraftian fiction, really. And then from there, we looked at existing supplements that had been released with the creatures that had been used and the characters who might appear. And then obviously I made up some of my own as well. But it was then, yes, a case of plotting it out as much like a movie as a game book to make sure that everything worked, and that even when you have some huge fight at the end, it's still possible for your lone investigator to survive and win through.
Yeah, stress lone. Alors donc la question hein, comment est-ce qu'on faisait pour avoir est-ce qu'il y a beaucoup
un casting assez incroyable, oui. Donc,
assez incroyable, et donc effectivement c'était un des jeux, on était tenu par à la fois la ville, par le jeu, et puis donc par les révélations qu'il y avait à la fin. Alors on le précise, hein, les livres sont sortis il y a quelques jours, et donc évidemment il y aura une version française. On ne voit pas comment on y échapperait. So you wrote 2 books.
Yes.
And these books, Tides of Arkham, of Innsmouth, don't you?
Yes.
You chose another aspect, because this is more, I would say, open-ended. I mean, as a world, because you're not in a city, you've got the vastness of the ocean. How did you change your approach as well? Alors, donc, hein, on a un autre, c'est sur Innsmouth, donc bien sûr, l'approche, c'est pas exactement la même. And did you also have the same guidelines as, roughly speaking, as in Darkness?
Yes, the main guidelines, in terms of to use 3 investigators from the game. It's limited to 300 sections, and it's the same word count as the first one, and to use existing locations from the fiction, but also from the card game, because some things are developed more for the card game, expanding on what Lovecraft has written. But I was given much more choice in what I could do as an adventure. So I pitched a couple of ideas to them, wanting to do one set in Innsmouth, and they said that would really work because there is a big event happening within the game this summer, which involves Arkham. So they thought having something away from Arkham, although the adventures can be played at any time, because they're published at the same time, it just made it easier, because some people might be saying, oh, but isn't this going on Arkham at the same time? Well, it doesn't matter because this is in Innsmouth.
Donc, alors, il y a des gros événements qui arrivent cet été pour le jeu. Alors, donc, c'est axé vraiment sur le jeu de cartes. Et donc, on trouve 3 investigateurs. Et d'ailleurs, c'est une des grandes surprises parce qu'il n'y a pas de création de personnages. Vous avez vos personnages et vous choisissez entre les différents personnages. Ça doit reprendre des mécanismes, des mécaniques du jeu. Et puis, donc, il y a cette limitation 300 paragraphes. Et puis, donc, le nombre de mots. Et puis, surtout, donc, on doit prendre des endroits qui viennent de l'œuvre, mais qui viennent également du jeu de cartes.
And I think that having to cope with the characters of the investigators from the game card must have been quite a challenge to make it fit inside the game book. How did you design the characters, the willpower, the strength, all these aspects?
Alors,
so with the first one,
just translate for that. Donc, comme ce sont des personnages qui sont imposés par le jeu de cartes, comment est-ce qu'on réussit à les faire rentrer dans l'histoire?
Et notamment avec la question des statistiques, comment est-ce qu'on fait en sorte que chacun de ces investigateurs qui ont des caractéristiques très différentes ait une chance de réussir et puisse s'intégrer à l'histoire.
So with the first game book, we wanted to make sure there were 3 balanced characters. So one had the highest willpower, which helps with casting spells and things, or sorcery. One had the highest intellect and one had the highest combat. The idea going forward is that any investigator can be used to play any adventure. So it doesn't matter that maybe in the future that they're not absolutely balanced. It's just that the investigator fits that story in particular.
Donc, en fait, il choisit de mettre des investigateurs qui sont très équilibrés. Il y en a un qui a le plus de pouvoir, ça permet de lancer des sorts. L'autre de l'intellect et puis de combat. Donc, n'importe quel investigateur peut faire les histoires.
And then it's a case of, well, for me one of the books on my desk at the moment is The Investigators of Arkham. So it's reading the background on those characters, seeing which ones fit, and then just making sure that their profile, which appears in the book like that, that they're true to the character. So Silas Hand is a sailor, so he's particularly tough. He's got a high combat and a high health score. But then you also have to make it that they can fit in any book. So when you actually play as that character, it only talks about you do this, you do that. And any special rules linked to that character sheet apply throughout the game rather than in specific places. So, for example, Silas has the major ability Drifter, which can be used in any, when you read the rule, it would fit anywhere without having to be mentioned in the text. But then they'll have other abilities or other weaknesses, which are ones which you can collect in adventures, which then come into play.
Donc il y a ce côté très modulaire donc des personnages là. Il part d'un personnage qui a l'habilité de Drifter, donc il les a pris du jeu. Donc si vous jouez au jeu de cartes, vous allez les retrouver, et justement dans le jeu très, très régulièrement, parce qu'on ne sait pas quel investigateur a été pris lorsqu'on les lit, on dit est-ce que vous avez ceci ou est-ce que vous avez tel autre avantage.
So anybody who knows the original Innsmouth story, The Shadow over Innsmouth, will know that the Marsh family are important. So the fact that Silas Marsh has that surname, there's some connection. And then for this game book, we introduced the weakness tainted lineage, which could apply to anybody, but particularly works within that setting and that character. But it's something now that we can use in future game books if we want to.
Donc, par exemple, il prend donc pour ceux qui connaissent la nouvelle du cauchemar d'Innsmouth, donc il y a la famille Marsh qui est dedans, et donc le personnage Silas dont il parle. Donc les personnages ont des défauts, des faiblesses, et puis il y en a une, c'est lignée qu'on pourrait qualifier de non pure. Je ne sais pas comment on pourrait la traduire celle-ci, mais lignée souillée, lignée impure.
Souillée, tainted, oui, c'est souillée.
Voilà. Et donc ça peut marcher en fait pour tout le monde, mais évidemment, quand on a Silas, on comprend.
Also, we have Kahaku Narakumi, who's the folklorist. here.
Yes.
So one of his weaknesses is cursed, and that's one of the weaknesses that Rex Murphy has in The Darkness Over Arkham. So if you chose to play this book as Rex Murphy, which you can do, there will be places where cursed is mentioned in the text. But it also means you could now go back and play The Darkness Over Arkham as Kahaku.
Et là, donc là, vous avez Koraku hein, qui est ici. Lui, il a une faiblesse malédiction. Il faut savoir qu'il y a beaucoup de faiblesses hein, qui arrivent. Il y a des faiblesses, il y a des secrets qui arrivent à la page. Donc là, vous voyez donc, là, tous les secrets qui sont ici. Et puis, donc, and there's, so I was mentioning the secrets. And
Yes.
there's a secret you can get going section 2.
Yes.
In Darkness Over Arkham. Alors, il y a quelque chose. Vous avez, si vous jouez donc à celui-ci, si vous avez la section 2, le paragraphe 2, on vous dit, en fait, si vous êtes là, c'est que vous avez continué à lire du paragraphe 1, donc il ne faut pas le faire. Et puis, c'est écrit quand même qu'on gagne un secret qui s'appelle Lost in Arkham. On gagne le secret être perdu dans Arkham. So, this is, I've not seen this joke in Tides of Innsmouth, but how did you come with this idea?
So that was actually Aconite Books. They had done it for the Marvel game books. So it became a feature that we've included. But it means that I'm having a bit of fun with it now. So there'll be people who've read these and know that that's a thing. So you can now write sections where it's like a trap waiting for them. Like, we know you've come here on purpose. So take this secret, which maybe is slightly ruder.
Alors, c'était donc les éditions Aconites hein, qui l'avaient fait dans le livre précédent, et donc c'est devenu une sorte de petite blague.
In some other books, they were not so nice
Yes.
with the hidden paragraphs.
Yes.
Voilà, ça n'a pas toujours été un paragraphe très bienveillant, le paragraphe caché.
Yeah, the secrets is a lot of fun. I've got my light on, so it doesn't really shut, but there we go.
Les secrets sont très...
Because you can't find them all by completing the adventure in the correct way. Yeah. So you have to play it multiple times to find them. And I just had fun with some of the names. So there's things like swimming with the fishes, a kettle of fish in deep water, lost at sea, things like that.
Alors, donc, il explique qu'il y a des secrets, et donc les secrets, donc vous les cochez, et parfois, bien, en fait, pour tous les avoir, il faut mourir. Et puis, voilà, on est obligé de refaire plusieurs fois l'aventure. Donc, évidemment, dormir avec les poissons, ça rappelle le parrain, mais ça veut dire, donc, voilà, quand vous jouez à Innsmouth et que vous swimming with the fish, c'est pas bon. C'est pas bon. Go back.
Swimming and sleeping.
Yes.
This leads me to another question about the dying in books. We asked the question to Ian Livingstone. Donc, c'est une nouvelle question. When you were a young reader, how did you read game books? Did you read them with your fingers between the pages?
The 5-finger bookmark, as Ian calls it. Yes.
The same, yes.
Very much so.
Ok. Donc, quand il était jeune lecteur, lui, il lisait avec les doigts dans les paragraphes. And when you write your books, do you think about this way of reading your books, like knowing that you need to put a finger somewhere?
I do, and I think about it more now than I used to. When I first wrote game books, I wasn't playing them properly. So I was trying to beat people like me who were cheating. But then that led to them becoming very hard and possibly completely unfair. Whereas I now feel like I want to write the game book for the person who wants to play fairly. Because if they want to cheat, that's up to them, and it means they're enjoying the story. But yes, when I even divide up adventures now, you'll see that quite often sections are within quite a close range. So It does make it easier to physically hold the book and keep fingers in the pages.
Thank you.
Alors, ça c'est donc oui, ça c'est très intéressant. Je le traduis vite fait.
Alors, donc, je le traduis, Marc, et puis tu pourras rebondir dessus. Donc, au début, il ne pensait pas exactement à cela, et justement, il se disait que c'était plutôt même pour empêcher la triche, même si les gens qui trichaient aimaient ce qu'ils aimaient leur histoire. Et maintenant, justement, il met des sections qui sont relativement proches les unes des autres, ce qui fait que si jamais on meurt, eh bien, on sait tout de suite où on est.
Et c'est pas seulement ça, c'est aussi le fait qu'il design donc ces histoires. When you are shuffling the sections, you are careful to keep them tight and closer. Voilà.
Yeah.
Donc, quand il refait la numérotation, il s'arrange pour que des sections entières finalement se fassent avec des chiffres qui sont relativement proches. From 10 to 10 or 20 to 20, I've seen in
Yes.
some.
So you can't. It doesn't work all the time, but it's.
No.
I'm not literally jumping backwards and forwards everywhere. But when I muddle up on my sheet, I'll sort of follow sort of 20 apart and then go backwards the other way on a sort. With maybe
And it has another advantage because this spoils less the story this way.
Yes.
Et ça a aussi l'avantage. Voilà, c'est aussi l'avantage de faire en sorte qu'on se spoile moins l'histoire parce qu'on ne va pas faire sans arrêt des bonds en avant, en arrière et tomber sur des choses qu'on ne doit pas découvrir tout de suite.
When I muddle up adventure game books now, I have a system and it's by hand. I have a sheet of numbers and I write the new number, but I work out. So when I write them, I write it in order. So number 1 will lead to 2 and 3, which leads to 4 and 5 and 6. I don't muddle it up as I write it, because then at the end I can make sure that any section numbers that are the answers to puzzles can be in the right place. I can make sure the illustrations are spaced evenly if there are illustrations. I can do things like making sure that sections aren't too far apart in the book. So there's all sorts of things I take account of, even because some of my books now have maybe a bronze, silver and gold ending, and I'll make sure that they're kind of spaced relatively evenly throughout the book as well.
Alors, il parlait donc que ces livres ont trois fins différentes, enfin 3 codes de fins différents. Donc là, il prend en compte sur ce, mais surtout ce qu'il dit, c'est qu'au début, il écrit des paragraphes, mais il ne numérote, enfin il les numérote de quelque chose de chronologique, c'est-à-dire que la numérotation des paragraphes n'est pas une numérotation définitive quand il écrit, ce qui lui permet de pouvoir et d'être sûr que, par exemple, les illustrations vont être espacées d'une manière égale. Et
une écriture séquentielle d'abord, avant de faire un vrai travail de répartition pour équilibrer la répartition des paragraphes, aussi bien pour les illustrations, comme il le disait, que pour ce qu'on disait tout à l'heure, faire en sorte que les capsules de l'histoire soient finalement relativement compactes à l'intérieur.
Et alors, on va passer à justement la partie sur son passé. But have you also been working like that, with just not designing the definitive numbers of section for the definitive number for the section, or did your technique and process evolved throughout time? Est-ce qu'il a toujours fait comme cela, ou est-ce que son procédé a évolué avec le temps?
Yeah, it definitely evolved over time. I think I probably had it down like this with Alice, but certainly when I started writing The Wicked Wizard of Oz, in that one you can play as different characters, and depending on which character you are, sometimes you'll read a different section. But rather than waste a section saying, if you are the lion, go here, if you're anybody else, go there, I just use an icon. And you know in the rules that if you've got this character, you maybe deduct 10. If you've got this character, you add 20 to the section. So making sure that those all worked as well was another thing to factor in, which is why I had to be so careful with how I muddle the sections up.
Okay, and we need to do the math. Il explique également donc que dans des livres comme Alice ou comme dans Oz, où on peut jouer plusieurs personnages, on a justement, il fait vraiment des sections, ou alors surtout, c'est qu'il met des icônes, et on sait que si on est tel personnage, on doit rajouter plus 10 ou soustraire un certain nombre pour les paragraphes. Marc, si tu as la prochaine question.
Est-ce qu'on reste encore juste une dernière question sur Arkham ou,
Okay, last question about Arkham, and then we go back to
okay. Just a last one. At the core of Lovecraft's writing is horror beyond words. Yet the description of horror is also a key pleasure of game books.
Yes.
So the fighting fantasy series has always excelled in the use of morbid and graphic adjectives, a field in which the English language seems inexhaustible. So how do you approach this aspect of writing?
Alors attends, je traduis. Sorry. Donc parce que c'est une question qui est longue. Donc, on sait que dans l'univers de Lovecraft, évidemment, on va au-delà du mot, c'est-à-dire tout ce qui est indicible et innommable. Et pourtant, c'est justement cette description qui est un plaisir dans les gamebooks. Et donc, dans la série des filles fantastiques, il y a toujours eu cette utilisation d'adjectifs très morbides, qui frappaient. Et quelle a été justement cette approche qui a été utilisée pour Lovecraft?
Yeah. That's one of the things which is quite tricky, because one of the requirements of writing these game books is that they're not too graphic. And you have to treat, obviously, people go insane, but you have to treat mental health carefully and with respect. I think the idea of the madness of a Cthulhu Lovecraft story is something completely different from genuine mental health problems. It's something, the mind cannot comprehend, and then it just breaks down. So it's quite hard to do, but I'm trying to improve with each book to make them scarier without being graphic. So the next one, or if I was to write another one, I'd choose something which possibly people are naturally quite scared of, and then just really play up to that.
Alors, il explique justement que c'est très difficile là-dessus parce que il a déjà un cahier des charges dessus. Puis bon, la folie qu'il y a dans l'appel de Cthulhu, c'est pas non plus la folie qui existe dans la vie. Et il y a aussi, il faut être respectueux des lecteurs. Donc c'est ce qu'il explique, c'est que pour son prochain livre, s'il y en a un autre, clin d'œil, c'est que bien entendu, il va essayer d'utiliser quelque chose qui fait déjà peur entendre dans la vraie vie. Comme ça, il n'y a pas besoin de rajouter et de créer ce sentiment de peur. Okay, so now let's go to a time when you were younger. What was your first ever contact with a game book? Quel a été ton premier contact avec un livre dont vous êtes le héros?
The school that I went to had a bookshop, and I think the first time I saw, well, I wouldn't call it a game book, but branching fiction was Choose Your Own Adventure, because they were the late 70s when those were first published. But my first encounter with a true game book was The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. And I was 10 years old, so it was 43 years ago this summer. Mm-hmm. I remember going into Bath, which is where I lived near Bath, with my mum, probably to buy new school shoes or something. And yet I was allowed to go into Waterstones, the bookshop. And I remember seeing a table with books on them, and this book unlike anything I'd seen before, because the illustration is at the top and bottom and the text is in the middle. And it had this really weird title, The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. And I picked it up, and I think the first thing I saw was Russ Nicholson's artwork of something like the ghoul or the dragons or zombies, some suitably horrible piece of artwork anyway. And that really got me hooked. And my mum bought it for me, and I've never stopped reading them.
What did your mom say? Did she say, okay, I'll buy it for you? I think it's horrible, but if you
she was quite happy that I was reading, but later on, other parents would sometimes say, because it was around the satanic panic with D&D,
yes,
and they'd say, should he be reading this? And my mum would always say, but it's always good overcoming evil. But she passed away some years ago now, and in some of my new game books, that's not always the case.
Alors, c'était à Bath, donc superbe ville, Bath, que je vous conseille de visiter, là où il vit en ce moment, enfin où il est maintenant. Et donc, il y a 43 ans, il a vu dans la librairie Waterstone, donc Waterstone, c'est comme... Enfin non, c'est pas comme l'équivalent de Fnac, mais bon, c'est les grandes librairies qu'il y a en Angleterre. Et puis, il l'a vu sur une table, Le Sorcier de la Montagne de Feu. Et il l'a pris, il a vu les dessins de Ross Nicholson. Et là, ça a été quelque chose. Et donc, sa maman a dit que... elle n'était pas forcément très très fan, mais ça faisait lire. Et quand plus tard, parce qu'on était dans la période un petit peu de mauvaise publicité de Donjons et Dragons, quand des gens de son entourage ont dit « Mais est-ce qu'il devrait le lire ?» Eh bien, sa maman a répondu, c'est toujours très très bien quand on réussit à triompher du mal. I love this anecdote. So, you start reading. What's your relation with game books?
So, I'd always wanted to be a writer. When I was much younger, I started off just drawing very simple comic strips. And then I'd make little books and I'd give them interesting titles. The writing wasn't so much a thing as actually making a little book and stapling it together. And but I had an interest in writing, and I wrote, I think it was when I was 7 or 8 years old at school, I really took off with my writing. I mean, it was absolutely terrible, but I just developed an absolute love for it. So when you want to write, you emulate the sort of things you like. So I started out by then, as soon as I found out what game books were, I'd start writing my own game books or game comic strips. And I'm not sure I ever finished one until I was probably about 16. And it was about 200 sections long. But I'd been writing short stories and other things as well during that time, and sort of my own spoof of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But yeah, game books were, I think that's when I really thought, this is something people do as a career, and it's something I would like to do.
Il a toujours donc cette relation avec les livres dont vous êtes le héros. Il explique que pour lui, c'était quelque chose qu'on pouvait faire et qu'on pouvait en vivre. Et donc, son premier livre fini, c'était aux alentours de 16 ans, avec 200 paragraphes. Et surtout, il voulait émuler, il voulait imiter tout ce qu'il avait aimé. When we had Ian Livingstone on the show, he said that he never reads any book apart from his own books, so not to have his own inspiration and not to be, of course, accused of stealing ideas. Do you work the same, or do you have obvious sources of inspiration?
Generally, if I'm writing a particular type of book, I don't read that type of book at the same time. So when I was writing steampunk novels, I wasn't reading steampunk novels. And I don't read many game books anymore, I must confess, but I try and keep abreast of interesting developments of what people are doing with them. And I do pick up some every now and again, and I still read the new Fighting Fantasy ones. I feel I should. But yes, I mean, there are times when it's easier because there may I wrote Howl of the Werewolf, and somebody wrote on a forum, I wonder if he read my game book. I think it was Time of the Wolf or Hour of the Wolf. And it's like, that was a time I was glad I could say, no, I didn't. So if there are any similarities, it's a pure coincidence based on that source material.
Okay. Donc, on expliquait que Ian Livingstone, lui, disait qu'il ne lisait aucun livre pour pas justement être inspiré et ou surtout être accusé de quoi que ce soit. Et donc, John nous dit la même chose. Il dit que, par exemple, s'il écrit du steampunk, il ne va pas lire du steampunk. Et justement, il avait eu quelqu'un qui avait fait il avait sorti un de ses livres, et quelqu'un dit, je me demande si c'est pas finalement le mien. Il a dit non, je ne l'ai pas du tout lu. Marc, j'ai une autre question, puis après je te laisse aller sur le conducteur.
Okay.
How is it now when you read a book, being you having written so many books, having read so many books? How do you enjoy it? Do you really enjoy it?
Oh, I love reading. I read all the time. I mean, I don't just read game books.
I'm translating. Donc, justement, quand on a lu tellement de jeux, le livre-jeu, comme on en a lu, et qu'on en a écrit tant, comment est-ce qu'on peut lire, comment est-ce qu'on se retrouve dans l'action de lire, où est le plaisir?
So yes, I read quite a lot of historical crime fiction. I read non-fiction as well. I've got into a series of contemporary crime books. I still read the occasional Warhammer 40,000 novel. Generally, if it's by Dan Abnett, I'll read it. And I just love it. I do lose myself in a good book. And I think sometimes you will pick up ideas of how to do things unconsciously anyway. But certainly whenever I read things I've written myself, sometimes I'm pleased with how it's gone. And other times I think, well, I wouldn't do that. I changed that now. Or that's a bit clumsy. So when I read an author I enjoy, I always feel like I would like to emulate them. I'd like to be as good as them. I don't ever presume that I'm better. If there's an author I don't enjoy, then I just don't read them.
Et donc il dit qu'il lit donc beaucoup de livres historiques, également donc ce qu'on appelle les non-fiction, et puis aussi il lit encore les livres de Warhammer. Donc un salut Ronin Media. Voilà, il lit les livres de Abnett et Lanning, et donc en fait il prend toutes les idées. Parfois il relit ses livres et puis il se rend compte que c'était un petit peu maladroit. Marc, vas-y, je te laisse.
Concerning Warhammer, you have written some game books.
Yes. So I started working for Games Workshop back in 1994. Started writing colour. I moved to Nottingham, having left university, because I wanted to be a writer. And I wrote colour text for their army books. So I think it was second edition, I'm not sure, but with things like Codex Chaos, Codex Tyranids, Codex Angels of Death, I wrote stuff for those. I wrote things for Epic 40,000. And I was there when they were having some of the early discussions about the Black Library and Inferno magazine. I'll let you translate that bit.
Yeah, I'm not that. Warhammer is 40K is somewhat hazy for me. Donc en fait, c'était en 1994 au niveau de Nottingham. Donc il avait écrit plusieurs livres déjà, plusieurs codex. Et puis en fait, il était là au moment où on parlait. Donc il y a eu la gamme épique 40 000. Et puis c'est le moment aussi où on a parlé de commencer à faire la Black Library, la bibliothèque noire.
And then, yeah, having written short stories, I then wrote novels for them. And there was an editor, Christian Dunn, was working for Black Library at the time, and he was a huge Fighting Fantasy fan. And he really championed the Warhammer gamebook line, and he wrote Hive of the Dead, one of them. And then he asked me if I'd write one. And I was given a strict outline of what it should include. So that was the Herald of Oblivion, which is the Imperial Fist Space Marine. And then I was asked if I'd do another one, fantasy one. And again, I think on that one, I got more choice. I sent them several ideas. One was that they all had names linked to a preposition because they'd done Beneath City of the White Wolf. I wrote Shadows over Sylvania, but I pitched another idea called Across the Desert of the Dead, which was going to be a Bretonnian night in the Hekara.
Alors, ça c'est drôle. Donc, il y avait une des personnes qui était dans l'équipe éditoriale qui justement avait lancé donc justement les livres donc Warhammer, et puis donc qui était fan de défis fantastiques, et donc qui a demandé après à Jonathan s'il pouvait en écrire. Et alors, il expliquait que il y avait toujours des prépositions dans les titres, donc il y a beneath, across, et donc c'était une des manières pour lui de pouvoir s'amuser. Et alors, we have Gilles. Salut Gilles. Along with Jackson and Livingston, I think he means you, greatly influenced my teenage reading. I haven't given up hope that we will eventually adapt the content of the old game books into a narrative board game. Gilles works for Monolith Editions, so
that'd be cool.
Hence the
yeah.
Hence the note. Et bonjour Diane.
But with the Warhammer books, the first one was Space Marines, and I was told they wanted to include several different alien races. I think they probably suggested the Space Hulk idea, which I then came up with the name for that. So you encounter orcs, what else? Tyranids. There's also Dark Eldar towards the end. Oh, and the Necron tomb ships mixed up in there as well. So, and then the idea was that there's a squad of you who teleport across, but something goes wrong. So you meet one of your compatriots is sort of frozen in the wall. He's materialized in a solid wall. And then other horrible things have happened to the other ones.
Voilà, donc beaucoup de choses dans ces livres. Donc, il y avait des tyrannides, il y avait des space. Alors,
Space Hulk.
Yes, il y a Space Hulk, mais comme je disais, même s'il n'avait pas fait même si le nom n'était pas venu dessus, puis notamment on pouvait rencontrer des personnes que l'on allait sauver et qui s'étaient retrouvées figées dans un mur. So, you still work. You're working. How long did you work for Games Workshop?
Oh goodness, I did my first work for them was 94, which was the Dark Elves Warhammer's Armies book. And I think the last short story I've had published by them so far was Krakenbane's Curse, which came out, I can't remember now, was it a couple of years ago? But it's the one and only Age of Sigmar story I've written. Okay, so there were times when I wasn't writing for them, but yeah, over, I guess, almost 30 years. Wow.
Yeah, ça fait presque 30 ans, même si évidemment il y a eu des coupures, et le dernier, qui est le seul qu'il a écrit justement pour l'âge de Sigmar. Vas-y Marc, si tu avais une autre question.
Oh, but before Games Workshop, you have already published your first fighting fantasy game book, Spellbreaker. I have it here, 1993.
Yeah.
So, can you talk to us about?
Excuse-moi, Spellbreaker, il a été traduit en français celui-là, Marc?
Alors, voici la version française, Le Sépulcre des Ombres. Alors, pour les collectionneurs, c'est un peu difficile de mettre la main dessus. Ça fait partie des titres difficiles à trouver et qui n'a pas été réédité ensuite en V2, V3, etc. Just for our French collectors, this one is not very easy to find.
Oh, I thought you were saying it's not very easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I left school, I wrote to Puffin Books saying I'd like to write game books for you. And I got a letter back from Mark Gascoigne, who was the consultant editor on the line at the time. And he could have ignored it because an 18-year-old, just unknown, writing a letter. But he explained what I needed to do for a pitch. I had to write a quarter of the adventure. I had to send an outline of the rest of the adventure, highlighting any new rules, new monsters, things like that. But he finished the letter saying, I should warn you, your chances of publication are very slim.
Ok. Donc John a 19 ans, il quitte l'école et puis il écrit à Puffin Book, puis il dit voilà, je voudrais écrire des livres dont vous êtes le héros. Et Mark Gascoigne lui répond alors voilà ce qu'il faut que tu fasses, il me faut un quart du pitch, il faut ceci, il faut cela. Puis il écrit à la fin autant te dire quand même que tes chances d'être publié sont assez minces. Well,
so then I wrote my pitch, which was The Outlaws of Khan, as it was called. And it was very derivative of something like Forest of Doom. It wasn't particularly exciting. And Mark gave me his feedback, but told me what he liked and told me what he didn't like. So I then rewrote it. And he said, it hasn't really got much better. I still like these bits, but these bits aren't so good. So I put that one to bed for a while.
Alors donc le premier qu'il a écrit était une sorte de copie, on va dire ça comme ça, de La Forêt de la Malédiction. Et justement, Marc lui disait bon alors ça j'aime bien, ça j'aime pas. Et puis en fait il y a eu un petit aller-retour, mais en fait
Marc Gascoigne.
Marc Gascoigne, oui tout à fait, Marc Gascoigne. Et puis donc il a mis le livre de côté. So you were working.
Then I started with a new idea, a completely new idea, which is what became Spellbreaker. And I sent that pitch in and Mark said, this is much better, but here are some things to change to make it more engaging, to give the character more agency, because it's not a spoiler really, but in that one, if people don't know, at the start, you're chased by demons and you enter a monastery and you're with somebody else and you invite them into the monastery. In my first version is you're staying at the monastery and you wake up one morning and they tell you that this treasure's been stolen and you then go off to find it for them. Whereas this one means it's your fault. So it gives you a better reason to go and hunt this guy down.
Donc là, il a donc refait un nouveau script. Donc, redonne-moi, Marc, le nom en français.
Alors, celui-ci, c'est le Sépulcre des Ombres. Spellbreaker, le Sépulcre des Ombres.
Le Sépulcre des Ombres. Et justement, donc, c'est là où il y a eu des petites choses à refaire. Et puis, donc, ça commence, on est un petit peu accusé de quelque chose. So, I have a question, because when we look at the cover, I don't see your name on the cover.
No, so with the Fighting Fantasy books, if it's Steve or Ian, it says their name. If it says Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone present, it means it was a guest author. So my name is inside on the title page. It says written by. But the thinking was that all these different people wouldn't know who they were. Whereas if you know it's a Jackson and Livingstone book, you know it's Fighting Fantasy. So it was the brand really. And it certainly helped someone like me as a new author to sell copies of your book. Because if it had Jonathan Green on it, it wouldn't have meant anything at the time. Hopefully it does now. But...
A good friend of. Donc justement, on se retrouve, le nom n'apparaît pas sur la couverture. Ce qu'il expliquait, c'était pour des auteurs qui étaient invités et de passage. Et il expliquait aussi que c'était quand même une bonne chose parce qu'il y avait le nom sur la couverture, même si ça aidait à faire un peu plus vendre que Jonathan Green. So this is how basically everything started.
Yes.
How were you proud when you saw? Did you show your mum the book in the bookstore?
Oh yeah, they knew I was doing it. I was so excited because having started on this new idea, I think I had to rewrite that one once and then maybe the background again, and it then got sent. I can't remember now. I think maybe I'd done one rewrite for Mark. He then sent it to Puffin saying this is good enough for them to look at. They wanted a few changes, some tweaks. And then I got my commissioning letter from Mark, and he ended off by, I think it was just after I'd finished my second year at university. So I was at home with my parents, and my dad brought the letter upstairs because I was being lazy. I hadn't got up. And it said at the bottom, I'll now let you pass out with happiness.
Oh. Donc, il était à sa 2e année de fac, puis il y avait donc des allers-retours, et cette fois, et puis il y a eu la lettre finale en disant, avec mon marque, c'est écrit en bas, bah, ça y est, tu as réussi, tu es dedans.
I should
Marc,
just say as well, my dad was very excited, but he said, don't get put off. You've got to actually finish this thing now. But at that point, I hadn't written a game book as long as 400 sections. So I'd been commissioned, but at that point, the longest thing I'd written was 200 sections.
Ah oui, donc il devait réécrire, excusez-moi, et surtout, bah, c'est que il était pas, il n'avait jamais écrit un livre aussi long, donc il fallait, donc oui, c'était bon, c'est sa commission, c'est-à-dire il avait sa commande, mais il fallait écrire quelque chose de bien plus long. Marc, une autre question?
Alors, je vais d'abord commencer par juste faire un petit coucou à quelqu'un qui se reconnaîtra dans le chat à propos de Knights of Doom, connu en français sous le titre des Chevaliers du Destin, et dont je sais que c'est son livre préféré et qui a fait de Jonathan Green un de ses auteurs préférés. Coucou Ames. This one, Knights of Doom, your second, was really one of the favorite, absolute favorite of a dear friend, and I'm just saluting him with the cover.
I think that one's even harder than Spellbreaker.
Insanely harder.
I think there's one bit where you have to fail a luck test or a skill test to find a vital clue, which is absolutely wrong now. I would never... I've learned by my mistakes, because I feel you shouldn't... If there's a vital piece of information, it shouldn't be hidden behind a dice roll. You should be able to find it. You can have a dice roll for something else, but a vital clue, it should be fair that you can find it.
So you said that you need to fail the roll,
yes,
to get
absolutely.
So it means that if normally what you would do, you would cheat and of course say, okay, I succeeded. Okay, I will just translate that. Evil.
Okay.
Donc, il expliquait que c'était un livre, donc le livre que Marc vient de montrer était d'un niveau mais super dur, et c'est qu'il y avait même à des moments, il fallait échouer à des tests de chance, échouer pour obtenir l'objet vital. Wow.
Dans mon souvenir, c'est même pas un test de chance, je crois que c'est un combat ou un test d'habileté, avec cette particularité qu'en fait le livre est infaisable si on n'a pas une habileté extrêmement haute, et que là, pour le coup, il faut échouer. Voilà. It was very tricky because you have to have really high stats to be able to succeed in the book, but you have to fail this skill test.
It's embarrassing.
Did you receive a lot of hate mail after that, or?
Well, at the time, there weren't internet forums, so I escaped any nasty. I don't know if Puffin Books ever received hate mail. If there were nice letters or positive reviews in magazines, they'd send you a copy, but you never heard anything nasty.
Ok, donc il y avait une barrière sur le courrier qui pourrait être désagréable là-dessus. Donc,
et puis je crois que ça...
Que les belles choses. Oui.
Je crois que ça rejoint en plus quelque chose qu'on avait déjà dit dans une émission précédente sur le fait que Mark Gascoigne recevait surtout des lettres qui demandaient de la part des fans hardcore plus dur, toujours plus dur. I've heard that the letters received by the Warlock magazine were asking for always more challenging books.
Yes. There are people now, because I like to think I write fairer game books now, but some people miss the difficulty of the earlier ones. I did try and cater to both types of people when I wrote Beowulf Beastslayer, because I'm sure we might come onto this later, but it's based on the epic. And if you know the epic of Beowulf, again, well, if you don't, I apologize, but Beowulf dies at the end. But there is a way of surviving in the game book, but it's really hard to find. And somebody criticized me for that, saying it's too hard. And my reasoning is, your Beowulf is meant to die. So to do something different, it's got to be a really tricky path to find the way you can survive.
Alors, il explique que maintenant, il fait des livres qui sont plus accessibles au niveau de la difficulté, mais il y a certaines personnes à qui ça manque, cette grande difficulté. Et il explique par exemple que dans Beowulf, ici, que vous avez un qui est disponible chez Alconost. Donc, évidemment, dans l'histoire de Beowulf, c'est l'histoire le classique, cette histoire classique anglaise, eh bien, Beowulf meurt à la fin. Spoiler. Mais il y a néanmoins une manière de survivre et qui est très difficile à trouver. Et donc, il y a eu quelques fans qui se sont émus de ça en disant non, 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 c'est beaucoup, beaucoup, beaucoup trop dur. Alors que justement, voilà, il voulait ramener la logique même de l'histoire.
Ah, il s'agissait quand même de défier le destin, là.
Oui, voilà, oui. So, yeah, you talked about Beowulf and he dies in the end. Okay, we know that something happens in the end.
Yeah.
So, that's not a book. That's a mammoth of a book. So, 1,500 sections. No, sorry, no, not
1,000 sections.
1,000 sections.
1,000.
1000 paragraphes. 1000 paragraphes. Et on peut jouer 3 personnages. You can play 3 characters, if I'm not
You can actually
mistaken.
play as 4.
4, yeah. Because
You can
I
play
did
as
it.
3 vampire hunters and Count Dracula.
Yeah, c'est sûr. Alors, vous pouvez jouer Harker, Jonathan Harker. Vous pouvez jouer Mina Murray. Vous pouvez jouer John Seward, le doctor. I played it with the doctor.
Okay.
And I did not try with that guy. Et puis, on peut jouer donc sur les 4. Okay, 1,000 sections. The book by Stoker is a monument. How do you tackle that? And how did this idea popped in your mind? I mean, just were you like, oh, let's turn it into a book? Or how did it happen?
It's actually the 6th Ace game book. And originally I didn't want to do Dracula because Dracula had been adapted so many times. And there are other game book Draculas. But having started the series and having the idea that you could play as different characters, I then started to think, actually, because of the nature, the way that the Stoker's novel is written, is each character finds out different pieces. And it's only near the end that they put all those pieces together and work out it's the same guy that they're dealing with. So I thought I could make that work as a game book. And then it became the intellectual challenge of making that work.
Yeah, we'll talk about it momentarily. Donc, la première chose, c'était lui, il voulait pas l'écrire parce qu'il y avait déjà eu beaucoup de livres sur Dracula. Et puis après, il a repensé parce que Dracula est un roman épistolaire et il disait que les personnages, en fait, n'ont qu'à chaque fois qu'une seule portion de l'histoire. Et comme on joue plusieurs personnages, bien, on va pouvoir. Lui, il s'est dit, je vais pouvoir attaquer sous cet angle-là. Après, justement, il a fallu trouver tous les mécanismes. So, how many drafts for that one? How many playtesters that gave up and
I can't remember now. I think that one probably had about 20 playtesters.
20 testeurs, okay?
I mean, the way I wrote it was, yes, I'd read Dracula before, but then I read it again, and it was better than I remembered it. I think because I'd since then seen things like Bram Stoker's Dracula, which isn't Bram Stoker's Dracula, and all sorts of different adaptations where Dracula's always this romantic anti-hero, whereas in Stoker's novel, he is a blood-sucking leech. And I wanted to make him properly the bad guy again. I'll let you translate that bit first.
Alors, il s'est dit, la première chose, c'est que tout d'abord, il a relu Dracula, il l'a trouvé bien meilleur que la première fois, puis surtout aussi, il avait vu d'autres films, donc il pense notamment au Dracula de Coppola, et puis surtout, c'est qu'on avait donné une version de Dracula qui était très romantique et tout ça, alors que dans le livre, c'est tout simplement quelqu'un qui est assoiffé de sang, et voilà, une censure tout à fait qui est dite.
So, I reread the story and I did a breakdown of the plot. I'll see if I turn my light off, it might show it better. I've actually got it on my shelf. Maybe not. There we go.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So you can see it's different columns for different characters. So it's where it fits in. This bit's Harker. Then this is the first bit with Mina. Then you've got the first bit with Seward over here. And that goes on for about 3 pages like that.
Wow.
So a very detailed breakdown. So I knew when I did that, it would be a long book. I didn't know
Oh,
how
I'm sorry.
long. Oh, sorry.
No, this is my fault. I tried to no, okay. Do not play with fire. Yeah, okay. Here we are. Yeah, this is what I wanted.
Oh,
to.
okay.
Yeah. And so, ce qu'il nous a montré, c'était justement le livre et les colonnes de chacun des personnages. So this is how you. Yeah, go on, please.
Yeah. So when I adapt an existing story, I feel there's certain beats you have to hit. Otherwise, why would you bother telling that story? But then also with something like Dracula, there's a section where Van Helsing has worked out that Dracula's a vampire, and he says, but we won't go and do it tonight. We'll come back in a couple of days' time. So I thought, why would you do that? So I was able to change those sort of things. But there's also sections where you think this would make a really good choice for the reader. I could add something here. One of the things I did was I added or put back into the story Dracula's Guest, which is a short story that was published after Stoker died, but people think it's the missing first chapter of the novel. So I was able to put that back into the story.
Il explique justement quand on doit adapter cette œuvre, donc il y a des éléments, il y a des incontournables parce que sinon on n'est plus dedans. Puis il y a aussi des choses qu'on peut modifier. Alors il donne cet exemple où Van Helsing découvre que trouve tout sur Dracula, puis il dit on va revenir dans 2 jours, donc non. Et puis également il a intégré l'invité de Dracula qui était la nouvelle posthume, la nouvelle posthume de Stoker, où on pense que c'est le chapitre manquant. I remember when I read it the first time, we have a meeting with Reinfeld.
Yes.
And I knew how the meeting ended in the book. And I was a little bit tense, nervous, because I didn't want to die. And you changed the outcome. Actually, it's not that it really changed, but we get unharmed out of it.
Yes.
And alors, il y a une rencontre avec Reinfeld et moi je savais quand on a lu le livre, on sait comment ça se passait et j'étais très très tendu parce que je savais pas, je me dis mais je vais me faire attaquer. On réussit à s'en sortir. And ma question c'est comment est-ce que justement on choisit ces éléments et comment est-ce qu'on joue avec le lecteur? How do you pick up these moments and how do you play with the reader? Because everyone is expecting something to happen. So when do you choose that, okay, that will definitely happen, or no, that won't happen? Comment est-ce qu'on choisit justement?
How do I choose? That's a good question. I think partly just because I've written game books for so long, I've quite often approached a piece of fiction as thinking, well, either this could happen or that could happen. I've done it in my own writing, and writing a novel is quite hard because you have to choose one of them, whereas in a game book you can put both of them in. So I think my brain is just attuned that way. And there are particular scenes where, like you say, you know that readers are expecting a certain thing to happen, so you can play with their expectations a little bit.
Donc il dit que justement c'est son expérience d'écrivain, et dans un écrivain il peut se passer ceci ou il peut se passer cela. L'avantage donc dans le livre-jeu c'est qu'il peut se passer les deux, et puis justement c'est avec toute l'expérience que ça peut arriver. J'ai une dernière question dessus, Marc, et puis après, when you finished the last section, how did you feel? Did you feel with such a monster? Were you nervous? Were you happy? Relieved?
Relieved. The way I wrote it was I wrote the first, I wrote the 3 vampire hunters together, and so as it progressed in that story, so following the breakdown, I would write it in that order. So
il écrit d'abord les 3 chasseurs de vampires en premier.
So yeah, there we can see him better there. So I'd write it in that order. And having done that, it was 800 sections long. And I'd crowdfunded it through Kickstarter saying, you'll also be able to play as Count Dracula. And at that point, I thought, why did I put that in? But then also I thought, but that's what makes it, I'm actually really interested in writing you as the bad guy, and the ideas I'd had for how to tell Dracula's story, expanding on what Stoker had suggested. So it's never stated in the novel, but it's implied that he's Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler. So I made that explicit. And Dracula's story starts in the 15th century at a real historical event before Dracula was a vampire. So I had to think, why would he choose to become a vampire and everything that follows afterwards? So you have things like Dracula meets Renfield, because you only meet him in the book once he's already gone mad, but you meet him before he goes mad, and it's what you do drives him mad. So that was, again, although it was hard work at that point to keep going, it was also really rewarding.
Donc alors là, c'est la belle anecdote. Il avait écrit donc les 3 chasseurs, ça faisait 800 paragraphes, et le livre est sorti, donc il a fait l'objet d'un financement participatif, et puis dedans il écrit et vous pouvez jouer Dracula. Boum. Et donc 200 paragraphes de plus. Et par exemple, eh bien, je parlais de Renfield, qui est son âme damnée et qui est folle, et celle qui s'arrache le doigt et qui crie le sang et la vie. Eh bien, au début, elle n'était pas folle. Et donc, c'est justement, on peut jouer cela, et ce sont des points qui sont mis en avant.
Voilà. Et puis, il avait aussi expliqué que quand il avait terminé avec ses 3 principaux investigateurs, enfin chasseurs de vampires, au moment du Kickstarter, du financement participatif, il avait dit, et si jamais nous dépassons un certain palier, je rajouterai le comte Dracula, et qu'il a quand même un petit peu amèrement regretté ça dans un premier temps, en se disant pourquoi je me suis engagé là-dedans, et finalement il a trouvé une façon très originale de le faire et de l'inclure. And adding the Count Dracula, you know that R.B. Brennan did it in another game book, but your way of doing it is completely different.
Yes, I did buy his book, and then I didn't read it because I didn't want to be influenced, but I knew I wanted to stick very closely to Stoker's original, and I knew what I wanted to add to Dracula's story. And it was one of my favorite parts of the novel is the Log of the Demeter, which has now been made as its own movie. And I wanted to tell that story from the point of view of Dracula, because he's the only one of those 4 characters who actually experienced it firsthand, and how he kills the crew one by one, and why he does it and how he does it. So.
Donc justement, il expliquait qu'il n'avait pas. Alors Marc, tu parlais de de Brennan, donc Dracula. C'est ça, le titre en français, c'est Dracula, c'est.
Alors le titre en français, c'est Le Château de Dracula.
Le Château de Dracula, et donc justement, Jonathan dit non, qu'il ne l'avait pas lu, et par exemple, il a voulu prendre des passages dans le livre qui n'avaient jamais été exploités. Ok.
It's on my shelf behind me, but I've never read it.
Mais il l'a jamais lu. Et justement, il expliquait que c'est l'Odyssée alors c'est pas l'Odyssée, mais c'est le Déméter qui est le bateau où ça finit très très mal pour tout le monde. Et bien justement, c'est comme on peut voir dans le livre comment est-ce qu'il va s'occuper de tout l'équipage. Marc, donc tu as une autre question?
Oui. Absolument. Alors, c'est une question qui est un peu longue, donc je vais d'abord la poser en français pour les spectateurs, et je la traduirai. This will be quite a long question, so I'll first ask it in French. En fait, ce que je voudrais lui demander, c'est lorsqu'il est arrivé donc dans l'écurie Fighting Fantasy, il est entré dans une franchise qui avait déjà une histoire, et cette histoire, elle avait déjà en fait plusieurs périodes et plusieurs univers. Ma façon de le voir, pour moi, c'est qu'il y en a 3 grands. Il y a l'univers et la période des fondateurs, Steve Jackson, Ian Livingstone, la période qui est celle de l'expansion de la franchise, avec vraiment là, justement cette écurie d'auteurs, certains qui étaient déjà des cadors et d'autres qui deviendront des grands auteurs du livre-jeu. Et enfin, il y a eu une 3e époque, un 3e moment, qui est un moment que moi je qualifie de gothique, le moment véritablement où Titan, le monde, prend une coloration gothique, et j'aimerais donc lui demander comment est-ce que lui, il a vu justement ces différences et comment il a trouvé son ton. Maintenant, je le pose en anglais.
In English now.
I say that for me, fighting fantasy had 3 eras and 3 universes. The first one was the founders era and universe, with Ian Livingstone's classic adventures and Steve Jackson's more experimental, boundary-pushing works, especially House of Hell, the Sorcery series, or the Creature of Havoc. Then came the time of the franchise era, with expanding in all directions, recruiting professionals like the American Steve Jackson's, and young talents destined to become masters, such as Dave Morris, Mark Smith, Jamie Thompson. And finally came what I call a kind of Gothic era of Titan, initiated by Stephen Hand, Jim Bembra, Keith Martin, closer to Hammer horror, developed in the realms of Galantaria and Mauristasia, and in a way continued by you in Ruddlestone, Femfree. Could you share your perspective on the different atmospheres within the fantasy, fighting fantasy books, and how you developed your own?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned Stephen Hand, because he was a huge influence on me as a game book writer. I loved his books, and the ones he wrote. Obviously, he wrote Dead of Night with Jim Bambra, but the fact that it was hand in hand with Martin McKenna's artwork in all of them, and they always did something different. So you had that great feel of the exploration of Northern Galantaria in Dead of Night. Then you had Legend of the Shadow Warriors, which was even more open world, it felt like, and you didn't even know what your quest was to begin with, which I think is quite funny. And then Moonrunner, it's all within a city, but it's solving puzzles. It's almost a crime thriller in some aspects. So he never did the same story twice, and I really liked that. I really liked his style. Again, it was more mature because the series had sort of grown up, not with the writers, but with the readers. So people who started reading it like I was when I was 10, then by the time Stephen was writing some of his, I was at university and I was still loving them. So yeah, I think obviously Steve and Ian had a huge impact because they did it first, and when I was so impressionable, then I stayed with it. But there were some game books, should we say, in the sort of 20s and 30s I enjoyed more than others. But then I sort of really enjoyed the Gothic era, as you put it. So that's what I think I then gravitated towards as a result.
Donc, ce qu'il expliquait, c'est qu'il est justement allé du côté de cette époque gothique, en quelque sorte. Donc, il a mentionné, donc tu as mentionné un Marc Stephen Hand. Tu peux donner des titres de Stephen Hand? Il a écrit quoi?
Oui, donc les trois qui ont été mentionnés, La vengeance des démons, L'Arpenteur de la Lune et la légende des guerriers fantômes, qui en fait forment un arc narratif inachevé, malheureusement, puisqu'il y a un 4e volume qui aurait dû sortir pour conclure un petit peu tous les thèmes qui étaient entrelacés dans les 3 premiers, et qui n'est jamais sorti. Et ensuite, ces livres ont été effacés de la franchise pour des questions un peu délicates.
From the franchise.
One of the things that I really liked that Stephen brought in Legend of the Shadow Warriors were the mandrakes.
Yes.
Which I think when he first did it, I'm not sure I realized they were the pod people from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But once I did, I just thought that was amazing the way he brought that into a fantasy setting for children as well.
Il parlait donc de dans cet univers de fantasy pour adultes. Alors j'ai pas compris le titre qui était.
Les mandrakes, ce sont des personnages qui sont inclus, and there should have been a 4th and last chapter.
Blood of the Mandrakes.
Blood of the Mandrakes.
Et donc justement, il y avait eu une très très grosse influence du film, l'invasion des profanateurs. Et alors, on va passer maintenant à une autre partie. Je te propose, Marc, qu'on parle de la partie historien. So now we're going to talk about your historian dark side. Alors la première chose, of course, this is how. Okay, well, no, it did not fall. Donc, You're the Hero, donc second edition. Donc là, l'édition qui va être sortie en français chez Scriptorium, c'est l'histoire des défis fantastiques. Donc de cette première édition, qui est faite comme d'ailleurs un livre dont vous êtes le héros. Et toi, tu as la version hardback, je crois.
2014, the first edition of the book. 2017, the second part,
okay,
and 2024, the remake of You Are the Hero, story of the fighting fantasy game books.
Donc, qui va sortir en français chez Scriptorium. Donc, c'est un ouvrage assez massif. And also, you also co-wrote Magic Realms. The
Yes.
Art of Fighting Fantasy. Et donc, je vous l'avais promis. Voici donc l'image. Voici la version française des défis, donc des royaumes magiques, qui sera publiée chez Arcane. Donc, nous avons eu l'autorisation de Mathieu Saintou pour pouvoir vous la montrer, parce que elle venait quand je lui ai demandé si on pouvait la montrer, il disait oui, tu peux, parce que Ian Livingstone vient juste de la valider. Et donc, c'est tous les livres qui sont, tous les dessins, les plus grands dessinateurs, donc des défis fantastiques. Et autant vous dire, Marc, hein, on s'en prend plein les yeux quand on lit ça, avec plein de petites anecdotes. Jonathan, how do you switch from reading, writing, to studying those books?
Oh, goodness.
Comment est-ce qu'on passe de lire, écrire, et puis soudainement à les étudier pour en faire quelque chose d'historique, enfin, sur le côté historique?
I'm not really sure. I suppose I could tell you the story of how the book came to be.
Okay.
Because
I'm just trying to... I lost you again! Oh
don't
my
worry.
goodness! So, okay, yes, so here you are.
It was in the lead up to the 30th anniversary. It's when
30e anniversaire.
Icon Books or Wizard Books were still publishing the series. I suggested to them all sorts of ideas, one of which was, I said, we should mark the 30th anniversary. And I pitched an idea for the War Against Chaos, which is mentioned in the Titan background book. And it was going to be a trilogy of the different stages of the battle. And that actually included, you could play as not just different characters, but different creatures. So there was a knight, a sorcerer, a giant, and a dragon. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. And then I started pitching individual ideas.
Donc, il commençait à dire, oui, bon, alors pour les 30 ans, il faudrait qu'on fasse ceci. Il jetait des idées, on pourrait jouer un chevalier, on pourrait jouer tout cela. Puis ils ont dit, non. Et il a commencé à donner donc d'autres idées. Yes, you may go.
So, yeah, one of the ideas was, it wasn't Death Trap Dungeon 3, it was called Thief of Fang. But the idea was that you are pursuing a thief through the city of Fang, and to evade you, the thief goes into the dungeon while it's off season. You follow them inside, you soon find them dead, but then you uncover a plot which threatens the whole of the city. But they said no to that as well.
Et donc, un autre plan qui était une sorte de... qui était, excuse-moi, Marc, ça aurait été quoi? Le titre français m'échappe. Ça aurait été
Les voleurs de Fang, Thieves
oui,
of Fang.
C'était inspiré du tome... Ça aurait été un tome 3 de...
Un tome 3 du labyrinthe de la mort. Hein,
le labyrinthe de la mort, voilà. Et puis donc, vous poursuiviez des personnes et puis on trouvait quelque chose qui mettait en danger la cité, mais non. Perhaps the title was too difficult to pronounce.
It is, yeah, it's a real tongue twister. But then I suggested Master of Firetop Mountain, which is where you play Zagor before he takes, so him arriving, leaving from the Reign of Knives when he and his fellow students kill Volgera Darkstorm, to taking over Firetop Mountain. But again, they said no.
Alors, il a proposé également de jouer Zagor dans sa jeunesse, le fameux sorcier. Ils ont dit non. Okay, frustrating.
So then I thought, well, we could do a history of the series, and I suggested a coffee table book. And I think the publisher said at the time, your ideas are great, but they're getting more expensive all the time.
Donc, il s'est dit, on pourrait faire une histoire avec, en plus, dans un format, donc, livre, donc, avec Coffee Tables, donc c'est livre cartonné et grand format. Alors, l'éditeur dit, très bonne idée, mais ça commence à devenir très cher.
So I knew the editor at SFX magazine, and they were doing a fantasy special, and I'd written a couple of pieces about books that I'd enjoyed for them, and I suggested maybe they'd commission an article about the history of fighting fantasy, and they did, and I think they commissioned it at 2,000 words, and I said, I think I might need a bit more, could I have 3,000? But when I actually came to write it, it was 7,000 words long, and I sent it to the editor saying, I know this is really unprofessional, and you can ignore this email and tell me to send in the short version, but just in case. And they published all 7,000 words.
Donc à la base, il a contacté SFX, puis donc on lui avait dit 2000 mots, et puis après, lui, il a dit, bon, il poussait à 3000, et puis après, il a dit, en fait, non, à la fin, ça faisait 7000 mots, et même si ça ne faisait pas, il a envoyé quand même l'article en disant, bon, ça ne se fait pas, vous pouvez demander une version plus courte, mais la voilà. Et ils ont publié cette version-là. But when you...
But in writing that, I thought I knew a lot about fighting fantasy, and I realized I'd only just scratched the surface.
That was my question.
So then I thought I could write a longer version of this and self-publish it, maybe on Amazon, like 30,000 words. And it was Christian Dunn, who I mentioned earlier. I was talking to him and said, have you heard about Kickstarter? It's coming to the UK this autumn, I think it was. So I thought, well, I could do it through Kickstarter. But before I got around to launching it, Sean Riley launched the Kickstarter to fund Turn to 400, which was his documentary history of the series. Unfortunately, he didn't raise the money he needed, but he raised about £15,000. So I thought, there's £15,000 of money out there from fans who would like to see a history of the series. So I then launched my Kickstarter, and I was very fortunate in that it successfully funded.
So, alors là, I have many questions. La première chose, donc, c'était, il s'est rendu compte que c'était quelque chose d'assez extraordinaire, un puissant fin qui connaissait peu de choses, donc il fallait creuser et qu'il fallait faire quelque chose peut-être en 300 000 mots. Et donc Christian Dunn, dont on a parlé, hein, qui s'occupait de qui était chez Games Workshop, lui a dit, t'as entendu parler de Kickstarter, tu pourrais le tenter. Et puis donc il y avait eu un reportage, un documentaire, je n'ai pas le nom, Marc, du
allez au 400, allez Turn to 400.
Ok, allez au paragraphe 400 qui était sur l'histoire de la série et qui n'a pas réussi à avoir la somme récoltée, mais qui avait quand même récolté 15 000 livres.
15 or 50,000?
15. He needed 40,000. But he raised 15. But because it's Kickstarter, it's all or nothing. So none of the money was taken.
Donc 15 000 donc, livres. Livres. 15 000 livres. Et Jonathan s'est dit, bon, il y a quand même 15 000 livres potentiellement que je peux avoir comme budget. Et and the rest is history, as they say. But the thing was, did you know how well people would respond? Because that was basically a bottle in the sea. I mean, just at the time you had, as you said, that was the beginning of Kickstarter. So, between people saying, yes, I will buy it, and people actually buying it, or people really being interested. So, did you any, apart from this £15,000, what hints, what clues did you have? Or was it?
I was lucky in that because when I said when I first wrote the books, there weren't any chat rooms or internet forums. There obviously were in sort of from the late 90s onwards, and I've become part of that community. So I was directly in touch with a lot of the fans, and certainly people of the same sort of age as me who'd grown up with them as children, who had that nostalgia, or there was that nostalgia value to it. So I felt I could market it to the right people relatively straightforwardly. But yeah, I didn't realize how much reach it would gain, and the fact that it was people all over the world were backing to receive a copy.
Ouais, donc, alors, même s'il y avait une communauté internet qui était là, il savait bien qu'on pouvait aller sur un angle de la nostalgie et de montrer les choses, mais en revanche, il ne savait pas à quel point il y aurait eu autant de monde. Marc, tu voulais dire?
Oh, just that I was very unlucky because someone has written on my book.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
You should call the editor. You should contact the editor.
Je disais, oui, quelqu'un a écrit sur mon exemplaire.
What was for you the most difficult part in writing the book that you did not anticipate? Quelle était pour toi la partie la plus difficile de ce livre et que tu n'avais pas anticipé?
So when I started writing it, I thought I'd write about 30,000 words. And when I'd interview someone, they'd say, well, you should talk to this person, or do you know about this person? And it just went on and on and on. And as a result, the book became late, which I was very anxious about. When it was published, it was only actually about 9 months late, which is not really too bad in Kickstarter terms. That said, and not all of my projects have delivered on time. I will confess that up front now. The one I'm finishing off is late, but that shouldn't be what people should expect. So in the future, I have plans to try and avoid that situation. But yeah, in the scheme of things, I had people were getting quite annoyed that their book hadn't arrived. And as you say, Kickstarter was still quite new. So they didn't realize that this was a likely thing. And I just didn't realize how much more was involved in producing a book rather than just writing it. Because normally I'd write a book, send it off to the publisher, but I was having to source interviews, source artwork, coordinate. I mean, I still had a publisher, Snowbooks, but there was so much more involved. The layout of the book, crediting the artwork, the copyright on the pictures, and all those little details, things like that were a lot to include. But the nice thing was when the book came out, people loved it. So they forgot that it was 9 months late and they just said nice things about it.
This is what I always say. When you have it in your hands, that's not it's not late anymore.
Yes.
Donc en fait, une des choses qu'il n'avait pas anticipé, c'est que il commence en fait à interviewer et puis en fait on dit mais tu devrais parler à cette personne, à telle autre personne, à telle autre personne. Donc ça a amené du retard. Et puis aussi, c'était une des choses, c'est que il n'était pas éditeur, donc quand il écrivait ses livres avant, il donnait juste le manuscrit. Et puis ensuite, il se débrouillait, mais là en fait, il devait absolument tout faire. What was for you the most striking thing you learned about this? Quelle est pour toi la chose la plus forte que tu aies apprise dans ce livre?
Probably the most striking thing were things which aren't in the book, because in interviewing various different people, certain people shared information with me, but it included other things which they said they didn't want to be made public. So the most interesting things, unfortunately, aren't in the book. Beyond that,
alors, en fait,
I'm not sure.
Alors, il disait que la chose les plus frappantes, c'est que en fait, c'est celles qui sont pas dans le livre, parce que les gens parlaient, mais ils disaient non, mais donc, je te dis ça, mais il faut pas que ça soit dans le livre. Voilà.
But if you scrub the Internet archive, you may find some interesting old interviews 20, 25 years, 30 years ago that gives us some hints on what may have not appeared in the book. Si on cherche bien dans les archives de l'Internet, sur des interviews qui ont 25, 30 ans, on peut avoir une petite idée des choses qui ne sont pas dans le livre.
And so
I'm very sorry, if you bear with me, my dog is just eating something he shouldn't be.
Okay, don't worry. On va continuer, on va faire des claquettes. On peut voir d'ailleurs la bibliothèque. Donc, c'est les éditions Scriptarion, hein, Marc, qui font.
Alors oui, pour l'instant, donc quelque chose est signé. On va voir. Hein. Pour l'instant, je ne crois pas qu'il y ait d'annonce officielle. Hein.
So now we have the second version, and you okay.
This is my naughty dog.
Oh,
okay.
So
nice.
while I'm talking to you, he's stealing things out of my rubbish bin. So I'm now going to send him away.
Dogs will be dogs.
Yes, it will. So when
There we go.
So your first Kickstarter was completed, so you were relieved.
Yes.
And when did the idea for the second edition came?
Well,
Sorry.
even though I'd written that, I still had people contacting me afterwards saying, oh, if I'd known about this book, I would have backed it. And some of the people I'd tried to get in touch with got in touch with me. So there were people I'd not been able to interview for the first one who I now had contact details for. And I thought it'd be great to include them. And also, of course, after the 30th anniversary, new things were happening with the series. And particularly, I knew that Scholastic, that deal was coming up. So it gave a focus to have another edition or new version, new parts of the book, like an ongoing continued story, to come out in 2017.
Il y a donc en fait, il s'est rendu compte, déjà, il y a eu le grand succès du livre, donc il y a beaucoup de gens qui disaient mais où est-ce qu'on peut l'acheter, et surtout, c'est qu'il y a eu des personnes qui tentaient de contacter et qui l'ont contacté, mais après la première édition du livre. En plus, il y avait évidemment la série qui commençait à évoluer, et donc c'était l'idée que l'idée lui est venue assez naturellement. I also have another question, which is perhaps not a very happy question, but that's life. Time is flying, and we know that we have lost some valuable people in the hobby, and whether artists or writers. Do you have them? Do you feel that it is being like a keeper of a certain knowledge that was actually nowhere to be found before that?
I hadn't thought about it like that before, but I think you're right. And there are people who I got to interview, like Russ Nicholson, who sadly passed away since. When I was writing the book, the artist...
Martin McKenna died as well.
Oh, yeah, that was later. But again, I interviewed him. Kev Bulmer, who did the artwork for Freeway Fighter, he'd already passed away. And it was actually his partner who I managed to get hold of, and she let me use some of his artwork in the books and things like that. But yes, it's when I mentioned earlier about wanting to write another book about the history of game books, I actually contacted J.H. Brennan. He agreed to be interviewed because I planned to do this years ago and I didn't do it. And now he's passed away and I've missed the opportunity. So I will forever regret that.
Donc je dis qu'il n'a pas, il ne se sent pas un petit peu comme une sorte de fonction de gardien, le temps ayant passé et ayant perdu déjà des dessinateurs ou des écrivains, et il dit qu'effectivement c'est ça. Et donc il nous donne l'anecdote, c'est qu'il voulait écrire un livre sur autre chose que les défis fantastiques. Il avait contacté J.H. Brennan, qui évidemment est décédé, et puis il y avait déjà eu certains dessinateurs décédés, donc c'est leur épouse, leur épouse. J'ai pas entendu le nom de la personne qui était marquée.
C'était Martin McKenna. Non, Bulmer.
Yeah,
yes, his wife gave you the authorization to use his art. This is
yes.
Ok. Donc, et sa femme lui avait autorisé à faire cela. Marc, tu as une question?
Oh,
okay. So time flies indeed.
Yeah.
So I think I must move on with.
Actually, so before you do,
yes?
with Kev, the first Fighting Fancy Fest was arranged partly around the launch of You Are the Hero, and the second one we did, we had a pub quiz the night before, and we. No, get it right. No, it was before the first one. Anyway, we had a pub quiz, and we raised money for the prostate cancer charity in memory of Kev Bulmer. So It became something which we've continued of all of the Fighting Fantasy Fest. We've had a pub quiz the night before, and we raised money for a charity linked to someone in the... So, for example, when Chris Achilleos passed away, yes. he died of a heart attack. So we raised money for the British Heart Foundation. And it's a tradition we're continuing.
That's beautiful.
Justement, une très très belle chose, c'est que la première donc Fighting Fantasy Fest avait été faite pour le lancement de You're the Hero, et eh bien il y a eu une cagnotte qui a été faite justement pour son nom de famille, c'est Bulmer, c'est ça, hein, Bulmer, voilà. Et justement, lorsque Chris Achilleos est décédé d'une crise cardiaque, c'était une fondation pour justement la recherche contre les attaques cardiaques, et enfin, en tout cas pour une bonne santé cardiaque, excusez-moi. Et en fait, chaque année, à chaque fête, il y a comme ça une cagnotte qui est faite, un don qui va être donné à une association caritative. Oui, vas-y, pardon, Marc.
Okay, so let's talk about writing game books in the 21st century.
Okay.
You have described the medium as a game and a book. What are the particular challenges of balancing these two natures?
Alors, donc, on doit écrire juste donc John avait dit, c'est au sujet d'un livre et d'un jeu. Et donc, quels sont les défis quand on est au XXIe siècle pour écrire Star? Et c'est effectivement, oui, c'est dans Tide of Innsmouth.
I think where many game books fall down, I feel personally, is actually in the book side. Well, it depends. There are some game books I've read where you'll read a long section and it'll just have one turn to, and then you read another long section and it's another turn to. And that to me is someone who's actually wanting to write a novel. They don't really want to write a game book. But then I've read game books where they're very short sections, there's little to no description, and you think the story isn't really important. They just want to have the structure of a game. So it's having that balance. And I feel with my early Fighting Fantasy books, although they are impossibly hard, the thing which people are very fond of Spellbreaker and Knights of Doom, because they tell a good story.
Yes.
And there are things Actually, I'll let you translate that first.
Donc, en fait, pour lui, c'est quelque chose, une sorte d'équilibre, parce qu'il explique qu'il y a des personnes qui vont écrire des très très longs paragraphes, puis qui vont dire allez à tel autre paragraphe. Et là, quand il dit ça, c'est pas des personnes qui veulent écrire un livre dont vous êtes le héros, c'est des personnes qui veulent écrire un livre. Ils sont plus dans le côté livre, et puis vous avez aussi des passages très très courts. Et là, ce sont des personnes qui sont plutôt dans le côté jeu, bien entendu. Et c'est ce qu'il expliquait, que ces livres étaient très difficiles, mais les gens les aimaient bien parce que l'histoire, justement, tenait la route. Donc tout est dans cet équilibre. Yeah.
But something else which perceived wisdom is that if you are the hero, if you're the character of the book, you can't have any sort of backstory or extra twists and surprises, and I think that's completely wrong. You can have character development, and one of the things I started to do, not just when you have an established character such as Jonathan Harker in Dracula, but when I wrote Stormslayer, your hero at the start has a backstory, and part of that is you can choose a starting artifact before you even play the adventure, and as you go through the adventure, you meet or characters or people who you've met before, you have a history with, and you as the reader discover that obviously as you read the story at the same time, but it adds a layer of interest, and you can have twists and surprises, and I like to play up to that. Yeah.
Donc là, il parle aussi du fait que certaines personnes disaient que le fait d'être le héros, il ne peut pas y avoir de retournement de situation, où on ne peut pas tellement développer en fait ce qui se passe.
Et surtout le background du personnage ne peut pas être trop prédéfini, puisqu'en fait, il faut véritablement qu'on incarne ça.
Et donc justement, dans le livre, celui que tu as montré, parce que donc, j'ai Stormslayer,
le maître des tempêtes.
Voilà, et donc on a un objet, et cet objet va pouvoir changer le destin de la personne, et notamment modifier la manière, on pourra modifier. Je suis désolé, j'ai pas tout vu, parce qu'en fait c'est très difficile de prendre des notes et de regarder en même temps. And do you apply this recipe to all of your books, or do you sometimes go back to older ways, if I may say so? Est-ce que tu appliques ça tout le temps ou pas?
Yes, I think I try to sort of keep the good and keep moving forward. There are things I see myself developing different traits in the way I write. There's, for example, something which I've now used more than once is if you are in a room and there's 3 different things you can look at, it gives you a choice to look at anything in any order. But the more items you look at, the more danger there is of something else happening. So, for example, in Tides of Innsmouth, you visit a hotel room and you can look at 2 items, and it doesn't say, have you looked at 2 items? The structure of the book will lead you so that if you then look at 3, something negative happens, where if you'd stopped after 2, you'd be fine. So I've used that before.
Par exemple, il continue justement à modifier, à mettre des artifices. Par exemple, il explique que, alors, il prend le dernier sur Innsmouth, vous êtes dans une pièce et puis il y a 3 objets. En fait, si vous regardez le 3e, c'est terminé. Vous pouvez regarder les 2 premiers, et le 3e fait qu'il y a une intervention qui arrive, et peu importe l'ordre dans lequel vous l'avez fait, tout est dans la structure en fait tout est dans la structure du jeu, du livre-jeu.
And there's something else I've done recently, which I'm sure I saw somebody else had done it first, but I hadn't used it myself. And it's where if you lose a small number of, let's say, stamina points, but it's not that. But for example, if you're running, say you're tired, you lose 1 stamina point. If you're about to die because you're on 1 stamina point, that seems like a really rubbish way to die. So I say, lose this many stamina points unless it would take you to 0, in which case set your stamina at 1. So it gives the player just that bit more of a chance to make it to the end, or to have a much more satisfying death.
Et également, par exemple, si vous avez une série d'événements et on perd l'équivalent de points de vie, il ne veut pas en fait que vous arriviez à 0 point de vie pour cela, donc il met dans le paragraphe si vous arrivez à 0 point de vie, eh bien en fait vous restez à 1. Yeah, you've gone soft.
Yes, I have. I'm a father now. I have a dog as well, so
voilà,
okay.
Voilà,
made me go very soft.
Voilà, des enfants et you have children. Do they read books? Do they read your books, game books?
They don't read my books, but they do read books. They both read a lot. I mean, we all read a lot as a family.
Ok, donc pour l'instant,
They
une
both
liste.
read one of my books, I think, but
Ok.
they still get them dedicated to them, whether they read them or not.
Ok.
Alors, j'ai une question que j'avais préparée avec Jonathan.
Oui.
So earlier today, I asked you if you might be able to sketch out a narrative graph from one of your works and comment on the logic behind its structure.
Yeah.
En tout cas,
So-
on avait donc, just one second, please.
Oh.
Yeah, Marc a demandé à Jonathan de décrire en fait une logique narrative, de faire sur les traits et de commenter dessus. Yeah.
So, so far, the most recently published. Actually, shall I talk about Ronin 47 or my new book,
Yes.
Shakespeare versus Cthulhu? Okay, Ronin 47. So, Ronin 47 is giant robots versus kaiju, set in the future, based very loosely on the legend of the 47 Ronin from Japan.
Ok. Donc ça, c'est son dernier livre. Alors, il y en a un prochain qui va s'appeler, c'est le Cthulhu contre Shakespeare, enfin Shakespeare contre Cthulhu. Et là, c'est le Ronin 47. C'est inspiré de la légende, donc avec des... Il y a des robots, il y a plein de choses, et donc inspiré de la légende des 47 Ronin.
So, in the start of the legend, a noble is betrayed, and or there's a trap set up so that he ends up having to kill himself, and his samurai then go Ronin, and they plot their revenge to take the revenge against the person who made him do this terrible thing.
Alors donc au début il y a un noble qui est trahi, et puis évidemment les samouraïs vont devenir Ronin, et puis il va y avoir la vengeance qui va être faite.
So in Ronin 47, you have the first act of the game book is the betrayal, except obviously it's a very different setting and it involves giant monsters and things. Then you escape from that, and the next part of the adventure is you're by yourself, but it's putting together what you need to have your revenge, find out where the bad guy's gone, what's going to be the method of your revenge. And then the final act is you find his base and you fight your way through and you're revenged against him.
On a vraiment les trois actes, qui est celui de la trahison, celui de se regrouper, et puis le tome 3 la troisième partie qui sera celle de la vengeance.
So that's very simple outline, 3 acts. When I did my first flowchart, it's just 15 boxes on a piece of paper. This box leads to this box, then it branches, comes back together. And like I say, 15 boxes, that was it. But then each of those boxes becomes a whole scene, which I break down into more flowcharts, and it ends up being a 600 section game book.
Ah oui, d'accord. Donc, au début, donc, il y a 15 boîtes dans lesquelles il met ce qui se passe, puis donc il y a des embranchements, et ça devait faire 15 parties, enfin, il devait y en avoir 15 à chaque fois, puis il y a eu, à l'intérieur, on en a rajouté d'autres, et ça a donné 600 paragraphes.
En fait, c'est une structure. On a une méga structure. You have one big structure, which is quite linear, but inside you have some capsules of events, and each becomes a small narrative diagram, and at the end it's just blooming like a beautiful tree. C'est voilà. Vraiment, donc structure linéaire, mais avec des capsules qui vont représenter chacune des scènes qui, elles, vont être chacune pleines d'enjeux. Et c'est ça qui va finalement permettre de faire gonfler la structure dans le livre tel qu'on l'a à la fin.
And so for your other book, the book to come, of course. Alors, donc ça sera Shakespeare contre Cthulhu. Donc à la base, c'était un recueil de nouvelles, mais ça va devenir un livre-jeu.
So yeah, with that one of the things that I've changed about the layout is the structure is 5 acts, which it's very linear in that respect, because Shakespeare's plays were 5 acts. But then within those acts, obviously you get the branching story, but it does all come back together at the end. But because of the different things that can happen in the first 4 acts, it can have a huge difference on the final act, because you play William Shakespeare and the first 4 acts are playing through, you enter the world of your own plays and you play through it. Then in the 5th act, you're back in the real world, but what's happened to you in the dream world has an effect on what happens in the final dramatic battle.
Donc vous jouez William Shakespeare et vous êtes dans votre propre monde, mais ce qui se passe, c'est que évidemment c'est axé sur, c'est en 5 actes parce que ainsi étaient les pièces à l'époque. Et donc ce que vous faites dans les 4 premiers actes va avoir une influence dans votre 5e acte. Et là, quand vous allez revenir dans le monde normal, que se sera-t-il passé? Do you like changing these structures? Like you talk about the first one, the linear structure. Do you feel like a breath of fresh air?
Yes, I don't like writing the same book twice. There always has to be something different and new about it. So I can't give many details, but the book I'm writing next is sort of a traditional locked room mystery, and it's all located within one house. But then you can visit almost any room at any time of the night as the story keeps moving forward. But depending on the time makes a difference on what you encounter. So if you go to, say, the library at one time, then another of the characters will be there. But at the same time, gradually the characters are getting bumped off like in a murder mystery. So I'll let you translate that.
Donc, il aime beaucoup changer ce genre de structure dans celui qu'il est en train d'écrire en ce moment. C'est un livre sur les mystères de chambre close. Donc tout se passe dans la même maison et vous pouvez tout visiter. Mais en fonction du moment où vous allez, de la journée où vous allez visiter, eh bien, il y a des éléments différents qui arrivent.
Et ça, c'est vraiment...
Before I even started writing it, I've had to plot out for each room who's there at what time, for each person where they are at what time and what they know, and for each time what's going on, so that they all link together and it's all consistent.
Alors, avant même d'écrire, il a dû en fait mettre sur le papier chacune des pièces avec qui l'occupe et à quelle heure auparavant. Wow. Do not lose your draft.
No.
Et ça, c'est vraiment une des plus grandes difficultés du livre-jeu, c'est la gestion sur le même plan de l'espace et du temps. One of the real challenges of the game book writing is how to manage space and time.
Yes.
So, talking about time, we are nearing we are getting to the end of the show. We're going to talk about shortly about your future project, but I have a question.
Okay.
In 10 years, in your opinion, how will game books be?
Oh, I think we'll continue to see them appearing as apps. It's interesting that although that computer games were said to have killed off game books, certainly in this country, it doesn't seem to have done it in France, but they've still come back. Just like Kindle, everyone's going to be reading Kindle, and yet bookshops are still selling so many copies of books. I think people like the physical experience of reading as well as the mental experience. There's something reassuring about holding something solid, and even the smell of a book. I mean, particularly when you have illustrations as well. So I think they will probably carry along side by side. What I think we'll see more developments in are with audio books and game book adaptations that way, and possibly whether there'll be sort of a multiplayer element to game books being facilitated by being able to play online.
D'ici 10 ans, quel sera l'état du jeu? Alors, il explique que de toute façon, il y a une sorte de cycle, c'est-à-dire que quand les gens ont acheté des Kindle, tout le monde disait les livres vont disparaître. Là, on disait de toute façon que les jeux vidéo ont tué le livre. Et il explique par exemple, on pourra peut-être avoir donc un mode multijoueur, par exemple, si c'est sur des applications, on est sur des textes et on a ce mode multijoueur qui pourrait arriver. Marc, sur le futur de la production de Jonathan?
Yes, of course. To conclude, could you share any details about your upcoming projects or about future French translation, if you are aware about them?
And a lot to talk about.
I'm hoping that Dracula will be translated into French before too long. The next game book that I will be publishing is Shakespeare versus Cthulhu, What Dreams May Come.
Would it be on Kickstarter? Would it be?
Yes, that was crowdfunded on Kickstarter. it's the play testers have now given me their feedback, so I've got to go through it and apply any corrections, and then it will be going to layout. So that will be out later this year. I am working on some other projects, but they haven't been announced yet. But
Okay.
if you've enjoyed books like this, for example, hopefully you'll be happy.
Ok. Donc, il espère que Dracula, donc, qui a été pledgé sur les éditions Alconos, sera traduit assez rapidement. Il y aura également donc Shakespeare contre Cthulhu qui fera l'objet d'un financement participatif et qui a été
La version livre-jeu, hein, parce qu'il y a la
Oui.
recueil de nouvelles, et là, ce sera la version livre-jeu.
Donc, le recueil de nouvelles, hein, c'est et là vous avez des auteurs comme j'ai pas mes lunettes vous avez Josh Reynolds qui va être là, Adrian Tchaikovsky, parce qu'il a écrit aussi pas mal d'autres livres, hein, pour ne citer que, notamment dans la science-fiction, si on aime les araignées. Et donc là, ça sera le livre-jeu. Et puis également, donc, il y a plusieurs autres projets qui n'ont pas été annoncés. Et si on a aimé les 2 premiers romans, les 2 premiers livres dans l'univers d'horreur à Arkham, normalement, on devrait être content. Clin d'œil, hein. Wink, wink, wink. Thank you, Jonathan, for everything, for your insights and for the anecdotes you gave us, and thank you for allowing us to share and to witness all the creative process and all the other elements you mentioned.
Well, thank you.
It's I really love the fact when you talked about the ideas that you had that were rejected, because it shows that so many things are attempted.
Yes.
And but now, being what they are, especially fighting fantasy books, it's really a universe that was, I would not say etched in stone, of course, but it seems to be quite installed and very difficult to move one way or the other, so as not to lose the very nature of that universe. I mean, Zagor would have been great when he was younger,
yeah,
and without taxes to pay, like Innocence and good thing. And Marc, si tu as quelque chose d'autre.
I'm very pleased to have this conversation. I think you are the lighthouse keeper of the game book, and you are one of the writers that really show that any object of culture could be a very good game book, and I think this is very important for the sake of our beloved medium. Thank you.
I'm always trying to turn things into game books. I think what I've done with Ace Game Books is you don't see any dungeon crawls. They're not traditional fantasy adventures, but I'm toying with an idea of writing something for younger children, as in before they might start reading fighting fantasy. I've got a few ideas for that.
Ah, donc justement, voilà. Donc, Marc, tu le remerciais pour ça. Et là, il disait qu'il justement, il veut des choses. Il veut pas du porte-monstre trésor classique. Il veut aussi écrire pour des enfants qui commencent à lire avant, justement, les défis fantastiques. And this is interesting. And we're coming full circle. Because you mentioned that your mother saying, he's reading.
Yes.
Ian Livingstone is very proud of the fact that, and of course, deservedly so, that so many people started to read thanks to his book. And this is also what you said. I want to involve younger people so they can read before reading other books.
Yeah.
And we talked about a game, a book. I think we may have a hint. About what you said. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Et un grand merci pour le chat. Cette émission est disponible en podcast juste après. Elle sera mise également sur nos éditions de Spotify. Un grand merci à vous tous.
Merci beaucoup.
Oh,
au revoir.
Fantastic French.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.